BEET KVASS what? What is it? Why do you drink it? How do you make it? Let me explain. Now, if you're part of the GAPS or Weston A. Price Foundation communities, surely you've heard of BEET KVASS. But for those of you who haven't, or even if you are in those communities and don't know much about BEET KVASS, this video is for you. And along the way, I'll explain why this is a staple in our home and on our counter weekly. Let's do this thing. So what is BEET KVASS? BEET KVASS is simply fermented beets. Kvass actually means fermented beverage. I'm not sure what language that's in, but apparently that's what it means. So fermented like alcohol? Well, kind of, but you could think of it more like sauerkraut or pickles. Both of those are fermented vegetables as well. Sauerkraut being fermented cabbage and pickles being fermented cucumber that help our gut flora. And in the Nourishing Traditions book, it mentions that BEET KVASS is actually a staple in Ukrainian homes. So, who knew? Okay, so BEET KVASS is fermented beets. Why on earth would you drink it? Well, BEET KVASS is a liver tonic. So, what's a tonic, you may ask? Well, there's a few definitions, but the one that best fits what we're talking about here, one that invigorates, restores, refreshes, or stimulates. So back in Colorado before we moved, I used to attend the Weston A. Price Foundation local chapter meetings. And at one of those chapter meetings, there was a guest chef whose name was Monica Corrado. She's got her own website, and I'll link that in the description in case you're interested in learning more, especially if you're in Colorado. But she's a certified nutrition counselor and a GAPS practitioner. And one thing that she said stood out to me from that day. That was many, many years ago. But she said that if she was stranded on a desert island and could only have 5 foods for the rest of her life, one of those foods would be BEET KVASS. And so to me that really stood out from somebody who's a GAPS practitioner and a certified nutritionist, that in her top 5 of all foods that's really nutritionally dense and helps your body function well, she chose BEET KVASS. So ever since then, I've tried to incorporate it into our family's diet with varying levels of success. Now, funny note, at that same meeting, we had a kind of a buffet of nourishing food, and that was the first time that I ever had beef tongue tacos, and they were delicious. I really liked it. Organ meats are a big part of Weston A. Price, something that they encourage people to eat, especially liver, but tongue is one of those as well, and I actually tried making tongue at home myself once. My husband wasn't crazy about it, but we tried. And then something that I gathered from Monica's website in preparing for this video was that, like sauerkraut, BEET KVASS increases the bioavailability of vitamin C, or in other words, it makes it so that the vitamin C that's in the beets much more readily available for our bodies to use. So fermented veggies are awesome for the gut flora, especially sauerkraut and BEET KVASS. And apparently BEET KVASS is well known for its nutritional and healing properties. Hey you, yeah you! If you're enjoying this or you're learning something, can you like it down below? Thanks! So why is my family in particular drinking BEET KVASS? Well, I want to support my body and my kids' bodies as much as possible. So that's why we're trying to live according to the Weston A. Price Foundation principles as we work towards raising our own pasture-raised meat and better than organic produce. That's a long journey, but I hope to eventually become 100% self-sufficient. And we certainly don't eat perfectly, but I try to pack as much nutrient density into our day as I can, and this is one of those things. So another big influence on my health journey with GAPS and with Weston A. Price was Amy Mahali, and she's with Be Well Clinic out of Colorado, and she's awesome and she's so knowledgeable. So she has a recipe for BEET KVASS on her website, and I've just been doing it from memory for the past many years, but I kind of double checked with her. But let me tell you about how it's made, and there's an important note from what I saw on Amy's website. So BEET KVASS is so easy to make. As you've seen me demonstrate through this video, you dice up the beets. Now on her website, Amy mentions that you shouldn't cut the beets smaller than 1 to 2 inch cubes. You don't want it to become like a soggy mess, I think is why. So you dice them and you put them in a jar of water, and you add salt and you put it on your counter, and that's it. Now, I had been doing this by memory, like I mentioned. I had been putting 1 tablespoon of sea salt to 1 gallon of water. I thought that that's what Amy mentioned at some point. Now, that's been working well for me, especially in the fall, winter, and spring months. But now that we're in the summer, I think I'm realizing that I need to add more salt, and I'll explain why. Now, on her website, Amy actually recommends 4 times that. She recommends 2 to 4 tablespoons per half gallon of water. So to me, that sounds like a lot. And actually, just recently, I was talking to my mother-in-law who was drinking beet kvass, and she said, "Oh, it's just so salty. It's awful." So I'm not going to put that much salt in it, but the reason that you put salt in it is to prevent the bad bacteria from growing and thriving. The salt prevents that from happening. So I'm finding that in the summer months, I'm getting more of the yucky bacteria or the like mold with the beet kvass. Now, you can check out the link below with Amy's notes on beet kvass, but you kind of get a feel for what's okay and what's not. It's really common to find like a white film on top of the beet kvass, and that's a normal bacteria, healthy, fine. You can skim it off and discard it, no problem. But there are other kinds of mold that are bad and you don't want, and you might consider throwing out that batch if you have it. That would be like green and black mold on top, which I have seen on mine before, or like a really fuzzy white mold. You don't want that. But just a thin white layer actually tells you that it's doing what it's supposed to do. So then you just leave it on your counter for 2 to 3 days and it's ready to drink. You strain the beets out and watch out because you're gonna get your hands messy like I did. Normally I mix 2 parts beet kvass to 1 part apple juice, or sometimes 3 parts beet kvass to 1 part apple juice, just because I like mine a little sweeter. But that's all there is to it. And we normally have it just in place of apple juice or orange juice in the morning. And I really enjoy it, the kids really enjoy it, and my husband drinks it as well. So you might be wondering, well, what do you do with the beets afterwards? Well, you can take those beets and you can actually ferment them again, just to kind of soak all the goodness out of them that you can. You put them back in water with more salt. Not as much, I don't think. I'm not sure on that. And then you can make a second batch that's not nearly as strong. And then at that point you have fermented beets. So normally at that point I just discard the beets. I put them in my compost pile. They go up to my chickens. They help make the compost that we use for our garden. But you could certainly eat those, and that would be a wonderful fermented vegetable to eat. Oh, and just a little side note, as you can see from my thumbnails, this also makes a wonderful dye, either for your tongue or for your hands or whatever else. So be careful to maybe put a lid on it if you're gonna give it to your kids. And don't spill, because it will definitely stain. So be careful with that. So there you have it, the why and how and what of beet kvass. I hope you give it a try. If you do, leave me a comment and tell me how it goes. But help your liver out, help it get all cleansed, and try some beet kvass. Thanks so much for joining me.